moving on, I guess, to deploy EMDS, giving the floor to Casper, solution and architect at IMEC as well,
Yes.
to present the project.
Yes, thank you. I don't know, someone stopped sharing the screen.
I stopped sharing, but it disappeared.
Maybe if one of you can share again the presentation.
Yeah, I think Ariana can do it in 1 second, probably.
Shall arrive in a second or two.
I guess in the meantime, I can already introduce myself to you. So I am Casper van Gheluwe, indeed. Like Marion said, I am a solution architect at IMEC, specifically again for the domain of urban mobility and logistics, which means that I try to convert the kind of technical work that is being done on several data technologies and AI systems to the application domain of urban mobility and logistics. And one of those projects where I do that work is in Deploy EMDS, for which I will do this presentation. The nice thing is that Dries has already given the IMEC elevator pitch, so I don't have to present IMEC anymore. But let me get ready. Yes. Perfect. All right, I have control. So hi, everyone. Once again, we're here to talk about Deploy EMDS and how Deploy EMDS aims to push the boundaries, literally cross-boundary, for mobility data exchange. It all stemmed from a shared vision, the shared vision of the EC to work towards a common European mobility data space. That's a multi-stage process, and Deploy EMDS is one of those stages. This vision stems from, on one hand, the sustainable and smart mobility strategy of the European Commission, but of course also, like was said before, the European data strategy, and is also supported or done in collaboration with the people at NAPCOR to really facilitate access and sharing of data from existing and future mobility and transport ecosystems. Like I said, it's a multi-step process. It started a couple of years ago with the PrEP D-Space for Mobility project, where they mainly worked on mapping the existing data ecosystems and also already analyzing and recommending certain common data space building blocks that could be useful for a future European mobility data space. Then quite recent, about a year ago actually now, Deploy EMDS was started, a Digital Europe program, a deployment action, where we really want to, from those recommendations of PrEP D-Space, build a common technical infrastructure, a couple of common governance mechanisms, but also really apply them in some real-life implementation projects that I will talk about later. Alongside, there is also a technical assistance study being conducted, where the interlinking layer, which is kind of the place where different mobility data spaces can share their catalogs and share their metadata. So that is also going on. And there's more, like Chiara said 1 or 2 presentations ago, we also have the Mobility and Logistics Data EDIC, the European Digital Infrastructure Consortium, that is also being set up, that is indeed meant to implement these multi-country projects by the Digital Decade Policy Program. The Mobility and Logistics Data EDIC is specifically meant to ensure the long-term sustainability of this common data infrastructures and to promote its large-scale adoption and really make them sustainable even beyond certain projects. It coordinates and aligns different common standards across different member states, and it supports these cross-border use cases with a coherent approach, a coherent architecture, coherent governance models, and so on. Right now, this EDIC has not been fully set up. It's under preparation, but as you can see, many European member states, I think I even forgot a few, are involved with setting this up, along with some other relevant organizations that are helping to promote this. And early 2025 also, there is a supporting project, Mobi EDIC, temporary name, I think, that will support the setup of this actual EDIC. But let's go back to Deploy EMDS. maybe very briefly, so what do we want to do? Like I said, we have common technical infrastructure, common governance mechanisms, and these real-life implementation projects. They are, of course, all very intertwined. It starts bottom up from these implementation projects. So these imply certain technical requirements that kind of help to shape the data space implementation and help to know what kind of technical common infrastructure is needed to make all these use cases possible. That's also what the rest of the presentation today will focus on. But on the other hand, of course, once these requirements come from the implementation projects, the common technical infrastructure needs to be implemented, developed, set up. And so these technical building blocks then stream back to the use cases where they can be used to enable their local data space use cases. At the same time, there is also the governance mechanisms that are being developed by other partners in the project, where the implementation projects and the different organizations behind those give input based on some urban data governance challenges that need to be addressed, such as actually those that Dries has mentioned before, where then the common governance mechanisms, on one hand, yield certain extra requirements for the technical infrastructure, some techno-legal considerations. But of course, these common governance mechanisms can then also be applied by the use cases to connect different use cases at the local level, at the national level, or even the European level. I'm talking a lot about use cases. The use cases are focused in these 9 implementation sites. I will definitely not go over all of them, but I did we have Barcelona, we have Budapest, Flanders, Tampere, Ile-de-France, Lisbon, Milan, Sofia, Stockholm, so really quite well spread around Europe. And to pick a few in a bit more detail, in Flanders, where I am right now, it's really about making the exchange of traffic measurements, traffic counting data, more understandable, more exchangeable, more reusable, and more future-proof by using these standards, by using data space technologies and building on an existing ecosystem that exists within Flanders, but also combining it with the governance set forth by the EMDS. Sofia is more focused on mobility as a service solutions for public transport and on-demand mobility. And in Milan, for example, it's really about optimizing the local public transport mobility network with different provinces, with the city of Milan, and by integration of their multiple public transport-related data sources. So, as you can see, these 3 use cases, I've only listed 3 of the, I think, 16 or something that exist. They are already quite different. So we have to look at how can we build a common technical infrastructure for all of these. And well, we did that very bottom up. IMEC, together with some of the other partners, did the requirements analysis for this technical infrastructure. We did that bottom up from the use cases down, from the use cases up. And we worked in a very technology agnostic way that we based on existing technical frameworks that exist or specifications that exist for data spaces, such as the Open Data Product Specification, the DSBA Technical Convergence Document, and the Data Space Support Center Blueprint version 1. 3 main steps there was we designed a use case requirements canvas for data space use cases. We did an intake process with the different use cases and then mapped the output of these surveys onto a number of technical capabilities that would be required from deploy EMDS to support the use cases. In a bit more detail, the canvas design step, so the first step, like I said, was really to survey the data space participants and the use case leaders, not only about their expectations, but also about their data products, the kinds of data that would be for their use case onboarded into deploy EMDS or one of the federating data spaces. That worked well, but it also, we saw kind of as a side effect that this really stimulated a data space state of mind in these implementation sites. It really helps to get the local authorities thinking in a data space way, which is kind of important because we notice that, there's a lot of technical baggage, there's a lot of governance baggage behind this. And sometimes it's hard for people to get started if you haven't heard about it much before. But this intake canvas really worked. And it allowed us in the end to form the basis to identify relevant technologies, data sharing protocols, and other access control mechanisms that are already in place in these implementation sites. And therefore, these could put certain requirements on our final deploy EMDS data space. Like I said, we used some core data space concepts like data sources, the real-time position of a bus on a server of the Transport Authority of Amsterdam, for example. But then also data products and data product offerings, where a data product offering really defines in the end how such a data product is really offered to the data space. So usage control, formats, how it's published, how it is put in the asset catalog, and so on. What you would see is that instead of just a position of a bus, it really becomes more the collection of real-time positions of all buses in Amsterdam, which, according to our data product offering, can be freely accessed by only Dutch researchers and only if their credentials are verified with an org ID. And they may use this data for only research purposes. They must cite a specific citation when they publish about it. And we also define that the data must be transferred via a certain protocol where it can be accessed and so on. So this means you can already see like it adds a lot of extra detail on how your data is made available, how it is shared, what kind of people can access it, under what conditions can it be used, and so on. It adds a lot of extra detail. And then finally, you also have the data projects. That's kind of the end goal. It's where actually offer value for the end users of these use cases, training models, business apps, and so on. So for example, in this case, a researcher could use this data to analyze air quality in Amsterdam or something like that, just as a brief example. This is kind of what the canvas looked like. It's essentially an intake survey where we ask about, okay, what kind of data product offerings will you add to the deploy EMDS data space in your use case? What kind of governance do you want to apply to it? Which data models are there? Which authentication requirements are there? Do you already envision a certain business model, or do you already know what kind of other stakeholders would be involved? And then as a kind of extra, we also asked about their plans for data space federation. Perhaps in some local data spaces, in some local use cases, they already have kind of a data ecosystem or even a real data space that they want to connect to deploy EMDS. And that would, of course, also imply certain extra technical requirements. Now, okay, we've looked at this survey, and thanks to these intake sessions, we actually not only were able to gather pure technical requirements, but also we got a much better, clearer picture of the project and also the local ambitions of these different implementation sites. And we kind of put these into a couple of graphs. For example, here we see when we list the number of data product offerings that these different sites want to offer, a vast majority of them are actually open data. 25 out of, I think, roughly, what is it, 40-ish? So a large majority is open data, which, of course, I think Dries also mentioned it before, makes it not easy to show the added value of a data space. If your data is already openly available, it's quite hard to innovate on top of that. Also interesting was that we noticed that, again, a very large majority of the data sets have absolutely no standardization at the moment. 53 of them just are whatever kind of local CSV format or whatever, or Excel files that the local city was currently using. And they had not yet considered how to standardize or put a standard data model behind this data. But we also asked about, okay, how do you want to see this in 5 years? Or maybe sometimes regulatory, how should it look in 5 years? And then we do see the second chart shows that from these 53 no standard data sets, you do see that some of them want to evolve towards DATEX2 or towards the Flemish Oslo standards or towards the GBFS or something like that. So we do kind of entice them to look towards standardizing. Also, this federation was also quite interesting to us. Okay, the majority says federation for us is not required, but there is still quite a large amount of local data spaces that want to kind of cooperate or that want to be somehow federate with EMDS. Okay, we did all that. We did these intake surveys, we did the intake process, then come the capability mapping. And this was done with guidance from the DSSC blueprint to use a shared terminology, shared vocabulary, shared names of capabilities, and so on. I will not go super too early. I will not go super detailed into the capability mapping itself. It's quite a technical affair that I, as a software architect, love to do. But it is a bit of a spaghetti of different links between questions and capabilities that you have to make. There are other trainings organized by Deploy EMDS that actually go deeper into this and that allow you to do this by yourself for your own data space use cases. But for now, I will leave this aside. And instead, we will look at the second stage, the second part of our methodology, which was after we have established the different requirements of the data space, we actually have to methodologically assess different data space technology stacks that exist, and there are a couple, to see, okay, to what degree can they actually meet our requirements? And how mature are they? What are the implications if we choose to use them? And also maybe some gap analysis. Okay, if we choose them, what else do we still need to implement? And to the best of our knowledge, this was one of the very first time that this happened. It's a very fast-moving ecosystem, the data space technology stacks. And the knowledge is quite scattered. And this was the first time that we really tested, okay, is this more than slideware? Is this really more than what they say? Does this really fulfill our requirements? We did that by defining software KPIs, customer journeys, an evaluation framework. We had some testing and then the gap analysis. It looked a bit like this. We started from our first deliverable, the capability document. From that, we defined a couple of key customer journeys that kind of guide how a certain data space participant would walk through a data space, what kind of functionalities they would use. From that, we defined several software tests, essentially, that would check if a certain stack works for those journeys. And for that, we also had input from ISO. The ISO 25010 is kind of a software quality KPIs that were used to build our evaluation framework. Once we had that, we kind of split the consortium into different, we call it testing facilities, kind of subgroups of partners that wanted to test one specific technology stack. And we did testing for FiWare, a data space connector, for the EDC, the Eclipse data space connector. And at a future time, we will also test the simple agent, which I think Chiara also mentioned in one of her earlier presentations. This is still coming, so we haven't been able to test it yet. These customer journeys, I will not go super detailed into these. They will also become available in our deliverable once this one is released. But there are 5 main business capabilities, which is product participant onboarding, data product publication, data product survey, which is basically looking for a data product in the catalog, sharing agreement, which is about, okay, I found an interesting product. Now I have to find an agreement with whoever is offering it to actually get access to it. And then finally, the actual data sharing. And so we did tests in all of these different sub journeys and components. Of course, when we do software testing, we have to make sure that our quality criteria are correct, that we use standardized evaluations. So basically, every test that we defined, 22 of these minimal tests, were for each of the stacks scored from 0, which means none of our requirements basically were met. So the stack is completely useless for this requirement, to level 4, which basically means almost all the requirements are met, and this is a very mature product that can be extended upon. I will briefly go over with you the results. The full results are not yet published, so I cannot share them with you, but these kind of like brief summary I was allowed to share. Which means that for our cases, at least, and from our experience, the EDC, the Eclipse Data Space Connector, offers the most of the necessary components for at least Deploy EMDS to support this early deployment for use cases or implementation sites that already really want to get started. On the other hand, the FiWare stack, it actually did show sometimes a very strong performance, but the setup itself proved to be a bit more complicated, and a lot was still missing. A lot of components were just completely missing or scored 0. But the big conclusion is actually that none of these technology stacks at the moment fully meet the technical requirements. So not only do you have some issues with data governance and with functional requirements, but even the technical requirements of data spaces right now, they are not fully met. There are still a lot of gaps. Some of these gaps we hope will be filled by the simple project from the European Commission. And at the same time, for now, if you cannot wait for simple, we would suggest, if you have a data space project that you want to set up yourself, to look at the EDC as really the basis of your data space project. Of course, that's not it. What are the next steps? Of course, we've now identified gaps, but we still need to create a development plan as a project to see, okay, how can we fill these gaps? We need to implement the data space building blocks that are not yet implemented to fill the gaps. And then finally, the deployment and operation of all these data spaces in mobility will happen and will be deployed later on in the project. Of course, like I said before, our technical specifications document will be available soon, but if you can't wait already, our previous deliverable on this requirements analysis for the technical infrastructure is already available. You can use either the QR code or the link below. I hope maybe I can also try to post it in the chat. Let me see if that worked. It actually did. I'm aware that this is actually quite a technical presentation, but from what we learned actually is that this methodology really helped to kickstart deploy EMDS and to really, like I said before, get the different use cases and implementation sites thinking about how the data space itself can support their use case. So if you have a certain case where you think a data space might be interesting, it might be good to look at our deliverable here, see our methodology, maybe apply the data space requirements canvas, and see if that really makes your use case more tangible and gives it more body so that you can further develop it, not only for deploy MDS, but really even beyond mobility or beyond logistics. We really built this as not only a technology agnostic framework or methodology, but also a domain agnostic methodology. It can really be used also for data spaces in language technologies or AI or agriculture and so on. It's really quite broadly possible to use this. So that was it from my side. So indeed, if you want to keep in touch, of course, you can email me, but also definitely follow the EMDS LinkedIn page and website, or subscribe to the newsletter, especially if you want to get notified when our next deliverable with the technical requirements, the architecture is released. Definitely subscribe so that you are informed when this is released. Thank you so
very
much.
much. Thank you very much, Casper, for this very insightful presentation, kind of a guide also on how to dive into these data spaces.